Okay, so open up the notes I sent out. This is essentially section 3. So we're moving away from Egypt. You might have to turn. Oh. Ethan, you there?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, hold up. I gotta see. Yeah, you guys don't have to join. I'm just recording this.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm just using that to record. So actually, I can't see if you guys are on here. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all right, I'll send it out, okay? You'll
All
get
right.
it this afternoon. All right, sorry about that. That was the first time anybody joined on that when I did that. I didn't think people were paying attention. All right, so just give you guys a heads up. I want to try to test over this chapter, not this coming Monday, but the following Monday. All right. So I'm going to send the test home. You guys do it at home. It's going to be a little bit longer. Just as long as, and it'll give you more time too. Like when you guys are in here doing the test, you only got like 30 something minutes. This will give you a little bit more time, and you just have to get it back to me by midnight. Oh, here's another one. Hey, Ethan. Did you join?
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't have to join. Don't need to join. Just leave it at that. You're getting in here. Don't join. You guys are messing me up. Okay. All right. So section 3, we're moving away from Egypt, kind of back to essentially kind of the Fertile Crescent. It's mainly talking about 3 civilizations, and these civilizations tend to get overlooked by like the kind of when we talk about like Babylonia or the Egyptians and later Persia and stuff like that. But they're going to leave lasting kind of contributions for kind of civilization as a whole. All right, so the first civilization that is mentioned in this section are the Phoenicians. All right, and so the name actually Phoenicians was actually, it's a Greek term. The Phoenicians may be those who are kind of mentioned in the Bible as the Canaanites, or they may be like kind of a separate kind of group, if you will. Primarily Phoenicia as a kind of a region is mainly what is now modern day Lebanon, with a little bit of part of like Syria and kind of Israel in there. All right. The settlements starting along that area may date back to about 2500 BC based on archaeological evidence. So kind of put it in context, like comparing to Egypt, that's in the middle, kind of the middle part of what we would call the Old Kingdom period there. All right. So as a result of them being on the coastline, the Phoenicians are known as seafarers. They're known as kind of middlemen throughout trade throughout the region. All right. So this is the area that we're talking about as Phoenicia. All right. So this area here in green. Now you see in red here, these are the various city-states that made up Phoenicia. Like Phoenicia's kind of established much like Sumer was with the Sumerians. We were talking about how they were a collection of city-states, each with their own kingships and lineage here. All right. But they shared certain cultural traits like language, religion, stuff like that. Also, with each of these kind of city-states, they would develop their kind of own like kind of specialized industries as well. Like, for example, the city of Byblos, which I mentioned briefly in that story of Osiris and Isis mythology, right? Byblos at one point begins and kind of develops an industry of binding text, books, if you will. So our word Bible comes from that city Byblos, because mainly Bible just meant book initially. Now, 2 kind of dominant city-states here, Tyre and Sidon, developed kind of their own kind of interesting industries. Sidon was known as a kind of glass making region. The kind of anything used for mirrors and stuff like that. Tyre has a kind of an industry in itself that we benefit here in Collinsville. All right, particularly like kind of like when we're talking about Fridays and stuff. All right, so and Tyre, like if you ever go to England, you ever get the opportunity to go to England, you'll notice that they spell like, you know, how we spell Tyre, Tire, they spell it Tyre. All right, it's a little weird, whatever, it's English. The industry that starts developing in Tyre that is later going to spread throughout Phoenicia is the production of purple dye. All right, and purple dye, mainly the squeezing of the murex snail to get this purple dye. Very labor intensive. The snail is pretty small. So it took about 60,000 snails, I believe, to make like 1 pound of purple lead. All right. So if anybody's ever, and it was highly sought after. So if anybody's ever taken economics with Mr. Shesky, he probably talked about the whole concept of supply and demand. So you have something out in the marketplace that's highly sought after, but you have a limited supply of that. What does that do to the price? Yeah, it drives it up, right? All right. So they would refer to this initially as Tyrian purple, but later they referred to as royal purple. So the only people that could afford it were the royalty, kings and emperors and such. The name Phoenician actually comes from the Greek term that literally means purple men. All right, so that's what they were initially kind of known for. So when we talk about the Persian Empire, the Persian Shah, the Persian king would wear purple. All right, so if like on Fridays, you guys came to school, Miguel, if I took your kind of with your sweatshirt and dropped you down into a like a time machine down into this to the Near East at this time, they would think you're a king. All right. And there's another kind of blue dye that's used for the kind of type of snails as well. This was the Murex snail. Now, this isn't actual size, it's the scale, of course. But the Phoenicians literally almost squeezed them out of existence, per se. All right. But there was, again, this was kind of like this was a major industry. It was basically kind of an exotic good for many people. Don't need to write this down for my pending Alzheimer's. Another major export was cedar wood. And this type of cedar wood would be used for ship making, like the Egyptian Navy. Basically, all Egyptian ships during the New Kingdom period were made primarily with kind of Phoenician cedar wood. So much so that the modern day flag of Lebanon today, which the Lebanon, those in Lebanon, like 98% of them can trace our DNA heritage back to the Phoenicians. They have right smack up in the middle of the flag is a cedar tree, although there are no cedars left in Lebanon. That's their kind of their nod to their Phoenician past. But also, too, they became like middlemen throughout kind of a regional trade network. All right, they established kind of like new settlements along North Africa as far west as Spain. All right, so everything that was kind of traded in the Mediterranean at one point probably had been touched by a Phoenician merchant. The Phoenician ships and the kind of shipbuilding they would do, very similar to later what the Greeks would refer to as triremes. All right, this is a kind of an engraving that they found of probably a Phoenician ship that was in Cadiz in Spain. All right, there was a kind of Phoenician settlement there. They came in contact with the Greeks, right, and that's where the name comes from. They made settlements, like I said, all throughout kind of like North Africa. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this city, Carthage, when we talk about the Romans. All right, the Carthaginians was basically a Phoenician city-state, were the most powerful kind of city-state in Western Mediterranean region. They fought a series of wars with the Romans called the Punic Wars. Punic, taken from the kind of the Latin term punici, which meant Phoenician. All right, so if you had to put your money, if you had to bet on who would win that war with Rome, you would have probably put it with Carthage, because Carthage had the larger population. They had more wealth. They had a navy. The Romans didn't even have a navy. The Romans developed their navy after a Carthaginian ship called Quinquereme washed up on Italian shores. They dismantled it and then put it back together. All right. So the famous General Hannibal was Carthaginian. There are even some belief that maybe the Phoenician sailors even made their way past the Straits of Gibraltar, maybe even far north as England. That's debatable. But the point is that they're all over the place, mainly because of their kind of knowledge of navigation, seafaring, all right, and the fact that they built really good ships. Now, the Phoenicians, as far as like culture goes, are going to bite off a lot of aspects of other cultures in the area. They are polytheistic, meaning belief in many deities. Now, each city-state would have what they call a Baal, a god that was kind of their patron deity. Baal became also a term that, like in the Bible, they used the term Baal to signify the worshiping of false idols to a certain extent amongst the Canaanites, which they believe maybe the Phoenicians. All right, but it also became a term for like anybody of a certain title. So like if you ever watch any period pieces when they talk about the Middle Ages, or even like something like Game of Thrones, where they refer to somebody as a lord, my lord, stuff like that. That's the same kind of concept. Probably the most famous Baal, the one that had the most cities kind of dedicated in her honor, was the goddess Astarte, who was kind of the goddess of fertility and other things. She's probably the same deity that the Sumerians would worship as Inanna, and probably the same deity that the Babylonians would worship as Ishtar. All right, a lot of the same stories, and kind of influence for Aphrodite and Venus, and then you have these kind of female deities that are associated with fertility. A lot of the stories tend to be the same. All right. But the thing that the Phoenicians are most known for, as a kind of like the cultural contribution to society as a whole, is the development of an alphabet. Right, and so, like we talked about Egyptian hieroglyphics, right? Egyptian hieroglyphics is the use of ideograms or pictographs, where you have a symbol that represents a whole word or idea. They can be tedious, and when you have combined ideograms or pictographs, you're drawing out stuff that may be very detailed, and it can be kind of like arduous. All right. So what the Phoenicians did was they basically developed sound symbols. All right, and they had 22 sounds. And essentially, what they would do is they put those sound symbols together. All right, and so they come in contact with the Greeks, and who come in contact with the Etruscans, who come in contact with the Romans, and in the process, they add 4 more onto to give us our alphabet, 26. Right, and so when I was a kid, when we would take English classes in grade school, they used to have something called phonics. You guys, I think they started phasing that out in the 90s, where you kind of sound words out and stuff. And so there used to be this program called Hooked on Phonics. It was a thing that you could buy to help your kid out. And like the tagline was like, Hooked on Phonics worked for me. The word phonics comes from the term Phoenician, if you will. All right, so this is going to change the kind of the nature of written language. The Egyptians are going to kind of add their concept to what they call like phonograms to that, where they still use kind of ideograms and pictures, but they kind of represent with sounds to a certain extent. So this, in many cases, in certain places, kind of replaces like cuneiform to a certain degree. All right. Now I'll kind of show you. This is a little bit better kind of comparison here. So this is a comparison to some of our modern letters with the initial kind of like Phoenician alphabet. Like you see, A almost literally is just on its side. You flip it over. B, same thing. Flip it over. D, where we're for delta. Like the alphabet comes from the Greek for alpha and beta, the first two letters, which they basically got from the Phoenicians. Like you look at H, for H, you just basically knock off the sides, if you will. So this made it easier for the Phoenicians to keep track of like commerce and records and stuff like that. All right. Don't write this down, pending Alzheimer's. Eventually, though, this region, Phoenicia, is at the crossroads of all these kind of bigger like civilizations and empires. So at certain points, the Phoenicians are subject clients to like the Babylonians, the Persians, the Egyptians, and stuff like that. The end of Phoenicia as a kind of a region usually coincides with the rise of Alexander the Great, who we'll talk about more detail in chapter 4. Now, the next civilization that they talk about in this section is a group a little bit further to the north, referred to as the Hittites. All right. The Hittites develop in what is now modern-day Turkey. And so they were a collection of various tribes and clans and kind of the Anatolian steppes there. That unified around 1900 BC. So this is in and a lot of the kind of a lot of the stuff we get about the Hittites comes from Egyptian kind of connections. So they compare Hittite history like Egyptian history. They break it down into Old, Middle, and New Kingdom periods here. So the founder of the Old Kingdom, the unification of the kind of these various clans and tribes, is credited to a guy named Labarna. Now Labarna is like one of these figures that we talked about, like Menes, right? He's kind of mythological and historical. It's a little confusing because also they were referred to their kings by the title of Labarna. Now, it could either be that used like how the Romans would use the term Caesar, right? When they would talk about emperors, they would use that term Caesar, or that Labarna was like that there was another guy named Labarna, or another guy his name Hattusil, right? Because the capital is referred to as Hattusis, so there may be a connection with this guy named Hattusil. But this was basically kind of the central part of the state. Hattusis, like Cahokia Mounds, is what they call a United Nations World Heritage Site. So this is the geography of the Hittite Empire during this period here, the Old into the Middle Kingdom period, extending from Turkey down into Syria, all right, and then later into Mesopotamia down further south, close to Lebanon. This is the kind of the Lion's Gate entrance into Hattusis, which served as the capital for much of the Hittite Empire. Now, the most that we know about, the kind of period that we know the most about, is during the New Kingdom period, which is credited to a guy named Suppiluliuma. Now, I was telling other classes here. In reality, I'm going to keep it real with you. You probably don't need this class, right? Like to function in society. I'm the only dude that's ever going to talk to you about Hittite kings. Let's be honest, or which probably is for the best. But what you need this class to graduate. All right. Also, too, you got all the notes here on a digital. Like you can get like a flash drive, copy all these notes when we're all done with this course. Go to the bank, get a safety deposit box, put it in there. And then when you're ready to start a family, you got an arsenal of names at your disposal for kids. And you want to name your kid Soupy Luma, call him Little Soup if you want. All right, I'm not retiring until the halls of Council High School are filled with Hammurabis, Ramses, Hatshepsuts, and Little Soupy Lumas. All right, after that, then I drop the mic. Now, Soupy Luma, there's evidence that and this is during the time of Akhenaten. So he corresponded with Akhenaten. Matter of fact, took advantage of the situation that was going on in Egypt. Remember, Akhenaten was trying to kind of change society by making it a monotheistic society. All right. So what he ends up doing is he ends up taking more territory from the Egyptians, like down into Syria. And then later, when King Tut dies, his vizier, his wife's uncle A, becomes pharaoh. All right. Now, in the story, there's a letter, a correspondence, in which King Tut's widow, all right, actually sends a letter to Supililuma, asking if one of her sons can marry her. All right. So because she doesn't want to marry the guy that A has set up for her. So he sends his son down. All right. In the process, the son is killed. The Egyptians kill him because A didn't approve of this. All right. Supililuma is pissed, to say the least. All right. He then basically takes it out on an Egyptian garrison that is in Syria, captures a number of the guys. Unfortunately, when he captures them, takes them back to Turkey, a number of them are infected with the plague. He catches it and dies. All right. But what he does here is sets this pattern where the Hittites are a superpower in the same realm with the Egyptians, if you will. And so this is my favorite image of Supililuma. All right. I don't know why his eyes are that big, but it was a statue that was uncovered around Hattusis. And then this is the kind of basically the kind of map of the other civilizations in that area roughly at that same time. All right. So you have the Hittites in blue. All right. You have the Egyptians in yellow, the emerging Assyrians in green, and then the Mycenaean Greeks, who we'll talk about in chapter 4. Roughly around all kind of in this kind of same kind of time area. Now, like I said, I watch the MTVs. I try to stay on top of what y'all into, right? I learned that you guys are into trap music, right? But I can't be playing Little Dirk all day or drill music or whatever like that. I can't be giving you chocolate milk and chewing gum. But Master Guys and Charts, I can hit that all day. All right. I may even take I'm on a whole nother level. This map, if you notice, is in German. No need to thank me. I'm just a little extra. All right. And so the Hittites also are kind of unique in the sense of the kind of type of government they kind of develop, particularly during the Old and Middle Kingdom period. This is probably disbanded during the time of Supililuma, but there's this concept called the Pancus, which they believe was an advisory council. And this probably comes on the fact that the Hittites are a collection of various tribes and clans. So at certain times, the Pancus would advise on matters of state, but at times maybe even determine who becomes the next king, if you will. This is maybe similar to what in Greece they would have as an oligarchy to a certain extent. All right, where we have a few people that kind of govern and kind of rule things. Now, at the time of Supililuma, we see probably the evidence of a more absolute ruler kind of case in that cases there. All right, and then basically culturally, like you're talking about the Phoenicians, the Hittites are polytheistic, and they bite off some aspects of the cultures around them. Primarily the Sumerians, Babylonians, right? One important deity to Shub is often associated as the weather and storm god. It was also associated, one thing he's shown with in a lot of cases is the thunderbolt, which is maybe similar to Zeus to a certain extent. He has an interesting birth. His father, Kemerti, who they believe was probably the Sumerian deity's equivalent of Enlil, who was the god of waters and stuff like that. Basically, he is born after Kemerti bites off his father's genitals, who is the god Anu, the Sumerian god. All right. And so there's a similar story with the Greeks in the story of Cronus and Uranus, in which Cronus emasculates his father. This may be the fact that the Hittites and the Greeks were in relative close geographical proximity. All right. So a lot of these cultures, they hear these other stories and kind of pass down. Ariana, the sun goddess, who was his main wife, she's usually associated, again, with a lot of the female deities like Ishtar and Inanna. This is a nice little statue of the two together. They seem like a very happy couple, to say the least. All right. And then with the Hittites also, they're going to kind of have a written code of law that is very similar to what the Hammurabi's code was, right, in many of the laws. However, how these laws are carried out and the punishment from them are a little bit different. So essentially, we kind of break down the statement, the Hittite justice and in this code rested in the main principle of restitution rather than retribution or vengeance. What does that mean, you think? Restitution. To be restored, but also to like what would the punishments be? Like with Hammurabi's code, remember it was an eye for an eye. All right. In a lot of cases, like there was like physical like harm. You would lose an eye, literally, right? You get your hand cut off or something like that. With the idea of restitution is monetary, silver. All right. So a lot of the punishments that normally with Hammurabi's code would be basically physical. This one was monetary. All right, in the most part. There was other ones that you would have physical lashings and even punishable by death. But compared to Hammurabi's code, it is much, much more liberal. All right, in that sense, in the ancient world. The Hittites were also known for kind of diplomacy. Like we had talked about that with the whole Battle of Kadesh, where they produced the world's first known peace treaty. Right. So a lot of the same laws, but punishment tends to be a little bit different. All right. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's not such a kind of distinction within class. Remember Hammurabi's code, if the higher the class were, the less you would be physical retribution. I think with the Hittites it was a little bit more equal in that sense, if we will. All right. But the thing that we want to know about the Hittites as far as like their kind of contribution to civilization as a whole, right, is that they're going to usher us into the Iron Age. All right. They're the ones who basically kind of move us out of the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. This is mainly because this area has a lot of minerals in that. But remember with bronze, you need copper and tin, and in certain parts of the Near East, tin was almost basically they're almost kind of overmining it to a certain extent. So with iron, what they did was they added charcoal to it, and so with that it created a higher heat and created a stronger metal. All right, and so iron replaces copper, particularly for weaponry, but weaponry in special. And essentially, we're kind of still in the Iron Age. All major structures, buildings, and bridges are basically using steel. And we know that the Egyptians probably kind of got this probably from their contact with the Hittites, because when King Tut was buried, he had a little piece of steel on his breastplate that was there. Which steel, like in that video, steel was probably just as important as gold was in that sense. All right, so that's the thing that we know. For the left behind for us, the Phoenicians with the alphabet, and for the Hittites it's iron. Now, what happened to the Phoenicians is the Hittites, is still debatable. All right. There's a group of people that the Egyptians chronicled called the Sea Peoples. And this, I believe, was during the time of the 20th dynasty. There were these people that would basically come from the sea, come off these boats, and they would raid and pillage along the coastlines. There were stories of these people from Egypt all the way along the eastern Mediterranean, Phoenicia up to Syria. The deal is that historians stopped seeing any type of histories, any type of like kind of writings or something like that, artifacts related to the Hittites roughly around the time the Sea Peoples were basically kind of wreaking havoc in the Eastern Mediterranean. The more popular theory now is that the Sea Peoples were probably displaced Greeks after the fall of the Mycenaeans, roughly around the time after the whole story of the Trojan War and that. All right, so that's what they're probably thinking, mainly because we stopped seeing any type of histories coming out of this area. All right, the last civilization that was mentioned is the smallest by numbers, but makes a large contribution when it comes to the issue of world religion, and that's the Hebrews. Now, the Hebrews are a kind of collection of these various kind of Semitic peoples that are all kind of within the kind of Fertile Crescent here. Like we talked about the Akkadians, and even the Hyksos as being Semitic. Generally, that's the type of language, all right, that is spoken and written there. All right. Well, they believe the origin of the first Hebrews was probably in Mesopotamia, in the city-state of Ur. All right, and they eventually kind of moved west, like a lot of people did in these periods. They would kind of like migrate, if you will. All right, what they bring with them to what they call Cana, or basically kind of Palestine, if you will, is a religion that we refer to as Judaism. All right, and the guy that was the leader of those small band of people leaving the city-state of Ur around 2000 BC is Abraham, the father of not just Judaism but also Christianity and Islam as well. All right, and those who are the name given to the followers of Judaism are known as Jews. In many cases, Hebrews and Jews are kind of used synonymously, but Hebrew is the language mainly, the ethnic stock. Jews are those who are the specific followers of the religion of Judaism. Now, we talk about all these civilizations are primarily polytheistic, right? They believe in many different gods. The idea that the world is a complicated place, to have one deity essentially kind of monitoring the whole situation seemed illogical, but not to the Hebrews and the Jews. And what they usher in is the introduction of monotheism, right? this concept of belief in one God. And the Jewish God they refer to as Yahweh. Now, another thing is that we'll talk about religions in this course in the means of kind of historical context. But the 5 major world religions, all right, they're generally viewed as Christianity, Islam, Judaism, which are the 3 monotheistic faiths, the 3 Abrahamic faiths. They all kind of stem from that. And then Hinduism and Buddhism. All right. And so the thing about those 5 that allow them to kind of transcend the years is that they all have a compiled text. They all have a book that basically says these are the beliefs, these are the truths, these are the laws, and that's important. Because when we talk about mythology, when we talk about Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, none of them really had a compiled text. Many of them were kind of oral stories that were passed down through tradition, right? And Judaism did that until we talked about the kind of the captivity in Babylon there. The kind of compiled book, and there's ancillary texts that kind of go along with this as well, is the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, all right, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. And they also serve as kind of like morality tales, a little bit like history, if you will, all right? And the thing about this is that the Jews that also made it kind of unique is their relationship with Yahweh, with their deity. In many cases, a lot of these cultures, while they would make offerings to the gods and goddesses and stuff like that, the gods and goddesses were almost ineffectual parents to a certain degree. All right, like particularly for the Sumerians. The Sumerians, the gods created human beings as a means to entertain them. There was like a reality TV show. All right, with this covenant, with this agreement here, is if the Jews kind of hold up their end of the bargain, then they get rewarded. If they don't, then at times they're punished, right? And there's like in stories of that in the Old Testament, Sodom and Gomorrah and that. And you have these various people, these prophets like Ezekiel and stuff like that, all clamoring, saying, hey, we're losing our way to a certain degree. All right, and so they're important to kind of maintaining this covenant. One of the earliest prophets after Abraham would be Moses, right? The story of Moses, which is told in the 2nd book of the Old Testament, the story of the book of Exodus, which basically tells the story of the Jews leaving captivity during the New Kingdom period, probably around the time of Ramses the Great. And in the story, Moses' origin, where he's kind of tossed into the river there in the Nile in a basket, and then raised by the royal family in Egypt, and then comes to find out that he is himself Jewish, Hebrew. And in the story, he witnesses a soldier basically beating up a Jewish slave, and he kills that soldier, and he's a man on the run, if you will. All right. And this covenant, basically, you show the example of this covenant tied in with the 10 Commandments, right, which are the laws. Like the video it talked about, though, they may have kind of heard these laws in Mesopotamia and such. All right. Moses doesn't make it to the promised land, right? Joshua is the one who basically gets them across the finish line, if you will. And then eventually the 12 major tribes kind of unify under the leadership of the first king of ancient Israel. And that's a guy by the name of Saul. So Saul establishes this also after defeating the various kind of cultures that are in this area of Canaan, what we know. The big one being the Philistines, that famous story of Goliath, right? However, Saul meets an untimely end. His story is told in the book of Samuel. He dies battling the Philistines at a place called Gilboa with 3 of his sons, right? Now, he has a youngest son that kind of picks up the mantle but rules only briefly. Saul is mainly succeeded, and this is the state of Israel here at that time, mainly succeeded by David, who was his son-in-law, however, was ostracized, was expelled from the estate. He establishes what they call the Judean dynasty. And Jesus basically kind of like claimed lineage through David in this case. All right. And David is the one who's told in the story of the battle with Goliath, the Philistine, the giant Philistine there. And that's always that story of kind of an underdog kind of story, if you will. David moves the capital to the city of Jerusalem, which is known as the city of David. Also, too, in the middle of the flag of the modern state of Israel is the Star of David. That becomes the kind of the insignia that usually is identifiable with Jewish people, right? So David writes he's the concept of kind of a Messiah in that sense. He's a political, religious, and military leader. A number of psalms are credited to David, but at the end, he's a flawed person, right? Like in the famous story, he has an affair with a married woman by the name of Bathsheba. She's married to one of his generals, a guy named Uriah the Hittite. He gets her pregnant as things happen. All right. He tries to hide that pregnancy by calling Uriah back from a battle. All right. Uriah refuses to leave his men and dies in that battle. And as a result, David ends up marrying Bathsheba. All right. So it's a little bit of a kind of he's kind of a flawed character. That offspring that he has with Bathsheba is his successor as the king, and that's King Solomon. He's generally referred as the third and last of a united state of a united ancient Israel. All right. While David makes Jerusalem the capital, he builds it up. Spends a lot of money in the process, nearly bankrupts the entire state, right? But there's a major temple that was named after him, Solomon's Temple, which is a source of kind of some kind of conspiracy, basically some fascination, if you will. He's also known for his wisdom. There was a famous story in which these two women come to his court, both claiming to be the mother of this baby, this child. And he says, well, we can't decide. Let's cut the baby in half. And then the one woman says, no, don't do that. She can have him. And he's like, you're the mother, because only a mother would do that, right? He also has an affair with the Queen of Sheba and such. But he's a spendthrift, has a number of wives. After he dies, the nation is split into two. His sons kind of fight amongst themselves. All right. And then, like I said, the famous structure of Solomon's Temple. All right, this was the kind of the basis for the temple, the kind of artist rendering of it. It was destroyed by the Chaldeans, who we'll talk about next week, when the Jews were sent into captivity there later. When basically this region was a Roman client state, King Herod, who was at the time of Jesus, rebuilds this. It's destroyed by the Romans. What's left of it is what they call the Wailing or Western Wall, right here. This is the most hotly contested piece of real estate in world history. All right, so here, what you find is you'll find people that come up to it. They'll pray next to it. They'll be very conservative Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews. You'll see sometimes they'll wrap these black tape around them. It's parts of the Torah. People can put prayer notes in there. Like in 2008, when Barack Obama was running for president, he put a prayer note in there. Somebody took it out and basically sent it to a newspaper, and they published it. It was basically he was praying for his grandmother, who was sick and died before that. Donald Trump went there in 2016. His prayer note basically put in there. Somebody grabbed it. He said, "This is a great wall," I think. All right. But over here is the Dome of the Rock. This is what Muslims believe, the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven on a white horse. This small location right here is probably the reason we have like 50% of like kind of the world's conflict. All right. Like I tell you, you guys are bored with much of history and a lot of this stuff. But in other parts of the world, the events that happened 1,000 years ago still have ramifications for it today. All right. So it's important to Jews for this location. It's important to Muslims for this location in Dome of Rock, and then obviously for Christians for the association with Jesus, if you will. And then this is the basically the split between the two states, the state of Israel and then Judea, with the capital of Jerusalem. So Israel is going to be conquered by the Assyrians, and then Judea is going to be taken by the Chaldeans. All right. Eventually, Jews are going to be able to come back after the Persians come through. But this is an area that's going to be conquered by various kind of civilizations and such. And then after the Romans basically closed Jerusalem off for any kind of religious purposes and such, Jews are dispersed throughout the region into Europe, what they call the diaspora. And they really don't kind of come back until 1948 as a kind of an independent state with the creation of the state of Israel. All right, so that's it. I'm going to send out a kind of worksheet on the Phoenicians for you guys tomorrow. Monday, a video on the Persians, and then we'll finish up the chapter on next week on Tuesday. I'm going to stop this.